Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Creatives Talk. My name is Shanae Banks, and I am so excited to have Mr. Craig Kraft on the show with us. Hi, Craig. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited about this interview tonight. And the reason I'm excited about it is because I am a fan of anything that is neon. And I remember when I came into your studio for the very first time. It was during the walk that the mayor had all of the businesses do. Um, the first thing that attracted me, I was like, "Ooh, I see lights." And when I came in your space, I said, "Oh my goodness, this is like a candy shop for neon enthusiasts." And I immediately fell in love with your work. And then you told me you offered a class, and I was like, "Oh my goodness." I said, and then the first thought I was like, "I have to get you on my show." Because I was so interested in learning about your craft. And what I want you to do is, I don't do formal introductions. I usually allow like the artist to introduce themselves
Yeah.
in the way that they want to be introduced. So, can you tell our audience just a little bit about yourself?
Well, I come from the Midwest. I was actually born in Iowa in 1949. And I stayed in the Midwest, until I left college. So, I went to University of Wisconsin for undergrad and then graduate school as well. And I really didn't start in my interest in art until I got in college. And I had a girlfriend from New York City. And she started taking me to the city, about my junior year or so. And I just had started to get somewhat interested in wood carving at that time. And then she took me to the Museum of Modern Art, and there was a Brancusi exhibit there, and there were these beautiful, simple forms, high polished. They did have a little bit of a look that was like a machine part. And then I just read about him, and he had tried to bring his sculptures. I think it was from Poland or Bulgaria, in that area, and into the United States, and they wouldn't let him in because they wanted to charge him a tax because they determined that they were machine parts. And he fought it for months in the courts, and he finally won, and they determined that it was an art object, and he could bring them in without being taxed. So it was a principle thing. But that was a moment when I really thought, if this is art, I want to be an artist, because I hadn't really been exposed that much to art in the Midwest. But I could relate to this sculptor and his story. Um, and other things about me, I've been an athlete my whole life as well. I loved playing tennis. I don't play so much anymore. I don't play at all. My joints are sore. So, but I still love the game. And I've also been a runner. I've kind of changed that into biking and walking now and weight work. So that's a big part of my life. And then the third component would be my family. I have my son and grandson and my daughter-in-law up in Pittsburgh, and I get myself up there. I would say almost once a month, month and a half. I get up there, and then they come down here once in a while. But it's been a joy to have a grandson, and we just have a lot of fun playing. So that's a little bit about myself.
Awesome. Thank you so much. When I was doing some research on you, I heard that you mentioned that initially you had someone that kind of got you into visual art. And like you said, some stuff you weren't exposed to. But I read an interesting fact about you that you actually studied zoology.
Yeah, yeah, that was my undergraduate degree. I actually was all set to I wanted to be an engineer. It was kind of the space age
Mhm.
start, people were preparing and going to the moon. And so there's a lot of enthusiasm about that. And so I wanted really at first to be an engineer.
Mhm.
And then I went to Purdue to do that. It's expensive out of state school. And I didn't really care for the curriculum. There was no electives, and I just wasn't that steadfast in my desire to be an engineer. So I just kept moving it down, to industrial management. And then, the ecology movement was starting at the time, and I was very involved with that. And so then I moved it down to the natural sciences and finally into zoology and got my degree in zoology. And then after that, the newly opened Institute for Environmental Studies opened in Madison in 73. And I got in their first graduate program there. I was very lucky and studied environmental studies. And The thing is, it was 20 years before there were any jobs in that field. So I mean, I could have become like a park ranger or something like that. It wasn't my idea of a career. Beautiful place to be, but not to stay. So anyway, so that was my start there, and moving into different careers slowly, evolving through college. And then it wasn't until I was exposed to this girlfriend I had that was from New York City, and we started going to New York, that I started to really start to get the hunger for art.
Awesome. And when you were like getting your hunger for art, um, did you know at the time that there was money in making art? Or was it just something that you just decided to do because you said, "Hey, this is interesting. I
Mhm.
think I want to get into it." Did you actually think that you would make a full career out of it?
I couldn't imagine that. I mean, I was living in Soho on a shared floor there, and the guy there was selling his work, so I saw that he could sell his work,
Mhm.
but he was driving taxi, for the main part of his income. But I saw sales there, um, and then what I saw, the people that were making at my level of training and all. I mean, you have to have training to do jewelry, but I saw that people would buy jewelry, especially women love jewelry, and if you could make something unique in jewelry, you could sell them. And so a partner of mine and I started to make these little occasional pins we moved down to New Orleans, and we made them for Mardi Gras, and they were faces brightly painted, very detailed, and very very meticulously carved and waxed and then cast into a hard material. And a New York agent picked us up in that flea market in New Orleans, and then took our line of jewelry to boutique and fashion shows around the country. And so then we started making money off of that. But that really wasn't my end goal there. I wanted to keep exploring and expanding what I was doing. So I started sculpting the figure in clay and
Mm.
making casts of that, and then painting that. And then that wasn't a boutique and fashion show thing. So then I started to show in galleries.
Awesome, awesome. And who inspired your work? I heard you mention someone at the beginning, and of course your girlfriend at the time. But
Yeah,
for you, as you really started to establish what your medium was, who
yeah.
was your main inspiration?
Well, I mean, I got invited to a workshop, a symposium by Stephen Antonakis, who's a very famous sculptor that uses a lot of neon and just light as his medium,
Hmm.
to study with him with a group of other selected artists around the country. And this was at New Smyrna Beach Art Center. And I went down there for a week and worked with him. And it really opened up my eyes. I mean, I'd already been working with the figure and light, neon, indirect light, direct light, drawing around them. But he would make statements like, "Greg, try to make something that no one has ever seen." I thought, well, that's a big bite. But that's really inspired me. I thought, what a great opportunity here to have a career that you make things that no one has seen. Now, of course, that's a pretty hard thing to do, but you can do it. If you keep your mind at it and you keep looking, keep getting critiqued, keep interacting with your public. You start to realize that you can make original art. Maybe it doesn't happen every time you try, but that was the goal, and that changed my trajectory.
Awesome. So, with knowing that you should make something that no one has ever seen before, would you describe your artistic style or preference as abstract?
Mostly it's abstract, but I did use that figure, for the
Mhm.
first 15 years of my career.
Mhm.
And now it's pretty abstract now. I mean, I just did this huge sculpture of an elephant that's in my front window there, which you've seen, I'm sure. It's
Actually
not.
actually, you're moving ahead of me, but that's great. Actually, I have a photo of it that I'm gonna show it
Okay.
to the audience.
Yeah.
This is amazing. And I remember the first time I remember when I saw it, I said, "Oh my goodness, I would love this in my house. This is amazing." Tell us a little bit more about that piece.
Well, I started to get interested in the human urge to mark, and so I ended up traveling to three different continents and going to 27 different ancient cave sites up to 40,000 years old. Big exploratory expeditions with government people helping me in the different countries. But and I went to Africa to see the work of the Sons, the oldest indigenous group in the world, and the rock etchings found throughout Namibia. But while we were there, we were offered the chance to go on these safaris, and I thought, well, that's the fluff of my trip, safari. But when you go on a safari, it's not a fluff thing. It's a big, deeply moving experience to see these powerful animals and so much diversity and so energetic and just so full of their own spirituality. And
Mhm.
that's what the Sons were impressed by, and they chose certain ones, especially the eland, but also the African elephant and a couple other ones to be, their spirit animals. And when their shaman in that indigenous group would go into a trance, and they had these trance dances, we actually got to see a trance dance, and clapping and singing for hours, and just so energetic, and the shaman just getting into a sweat, and pretty much just about ready to pass out. They wouldn't drink water while they did it. And about just before he passed out, or probably right afterwards, he could remember the images that he saw were the ones that they drew on the walls of the caves and etched on the rocks. And so the elephant was one of them. And so an elephant was a spirit animal, and it obviously is much more powerful an animal than the eland. So I chose the elephant, and I tried to come up with a way that I could sculpt the spirit of an African elephant. So I wanted to have it have substance but be elusive and light at the same time. So what I did was, first I needed a great sculpture of an elephant. I thought, well, I can do that. I mean, I could if I would have spent 3 years, working on that sculpture. I mean, I am a sculptor. But anyway, what I decided to do was look around and see if I couldn't get one. And I found a beautifully sculpted elephant that was done by a wonderful sculptor in Japan. And he was selling it as a toy, for kids. And so I got permission to use it. I got the elephant, and we did a scan of it, a 3D program. And then I had an architect assistant for a while there, and he suggested that we do segments of this elephant. And it
Mhm.
was every inch and a half or so we had a segment, outline of the segment, and we used those segments to hang from above, so they're just floating. You saw that in the photograph. And those segments then became, kind of the edge, or the shell of the elephant. And we did, but it didn't really have a real substance except for those lines.
Mhm.
And it was quite effective, immediately when I started to put it together. But a lot of the art was the way to hang it, with invisible wire,
Mhm.
and nylon wire and steel wire, and then spacers between them, and I mean, it just turned out fantastic. I thought I didn't never dreamt I could sculpt the spirit of an African elephant. And then in the last, 3 or 4, maybe the last 6 months, I started to hear more and more about the poaching of the tusks of the elephants around the world, and it's really still a big issue. And so I decided to symbolize that with an insert of ruby red glass in two sides of each tusk. And oh, there you go. You can see them there, to symbolize the horrific poaching that goes on around the world. So I kept my environmental education in mind the whole time, and it's still with me, and when I'm making my art.
Yeah, I this piece is amazing. It really is. I love everything, and even how you had to be very specific with you want it to kind of look like it was coming from the wall, so you had to use those invisible kind of like the clear string. So you had to figure out ways to hang it. It's just marvelous, and like I said, the way that it looks in the studio, it's amazing. I mean, I want all of your pieces in my house, but but that one is just it's just really nice. I also noticed that since we're on the topic of some of your work, um I want to talk about your unintentional, I believe it was called unintentional drawings
Yeah,
series. And I'm going to show the audience a few pictures. If you can kind of talk about this a little bit, what was your inspiration for these neon pieces for this series?
Well, when I was a younger artist, that is, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I had this compulsion to doodle or draw, like a lot of people, while doing other things. So I'd be
Mhm.
talking on the phone, I would be sculpting with one hand, and on the other hand, I would just be doodling, and I wouldn't really be looking at it. So they were really drawn without consideration. And I thought they were pretty interesting at the time, and so I stuck a bunch of them in a drawer in my studio. And then a friend of mine was in my studio, and I brought him out. We took a look at him, and she says, "These are really interesting."
Mhm.
Sometimes it takes somebody else to tell you that, but I knew they were pretty interesting, but she thought they were really interesting. So anyway, so we got them out, and I went through them, and I picked out, these three that I liked, and they were part of much bigger drawings. And I, outlined the part that I wanted to have made, and then we scanned that in and blew it up and made neon tube patterns for them.
Mhm.
So we got this drawing that was really done like an action drawing, really, but translated into neon, which was a lot of craftsmanship into doing that. I
Mhm.
had a great bender. I helped some at that time, but I had a great bender help me with the bending on that. And it has like 102 neon tubes, and the big one does. 102, and then it has 35 transformers. Each
Mm.
one is 90,000 volts. So it's just got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of volts to run it. And then I show the back on it too, that shows all the stems coming in the back, and I made that
Yeah.
into an acrylic case. You probably saw that too. And so the back is just as interesting as the front, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and I could imagine, I for audience members who may not know, can you actually explain what bending is?
Okay, bending. Yeah, each neon tube. Well, you could make straight lines, and a lot of artists, that don't bend much, they do use straight lines, and you can make some wonderful art with that line, that colored line. And but if you wanted to get it into a more unique shape, you have to bend it. So you take your straight tube. You can buy the tubes. We don't really make them here. We do buy our tubing. And anyways, you take a straight tube. First thing though you do is make a pattern of what you want the bends to look like. So you have
Mhm.
an outline of this bend and further bends. Sometimes it's many 10, 20, 50, 30, 40 bends. To make up an image. So then you have a pattern, and you heat up a certain section of that glass that you mark on the glass to indicate the amount of glass you're going to need. And then you take it into a fire. We use crossfires, which are short for doing tight bends, and we have ribbon burners for doing soft, long bends, and we have some various variations in between. And then the glass gets molten, and you have a hose up to your mouth with a mouthpiece, and then the other end of the glass you put a cork. And so once it gets molten, it's just like this, it's like this. The glass is like this. So then you immediately go up. You always bend up, and blow a puff of air. It's not much. You blow too much, you'll blow a hole right in it, blow a bubble at least. So that's how you make your bends, and it's one at a time. And each one's going to be a different set of markings, unless it's a continuous curve, and then it might be the same markings. Um, and so that's pretty much the bending. Now, after you bent it, you've got to fill it with inert gas because it would do nothing, bent. And so we have a manifold that we hook it up to, and we have various inert gases, mostly argon and neon, that we have to put into the tubes. But we also use xenon, krypton, some other inert gases. And these inert gases are unique in that they don't combine with other chemicals or other elements. So yeah, then we fill it under pressure to a certain pressure, depending on the diameter of the tube. And then the whole system then is lit by a high voltage transformer. Almost anything would take 3,000 volts, and longer, more expansive pieces would be a series of neon tubes. Could take up to 15,000 volts. So it's not high amps, which
Mhm.
our outlets are high amps, but it's high voltage. So it's not really lethal, but it'll knock you on your butt, I'll tell you.
Yeah, it sounds like creating the tubes, and of course filling it. It's a very it's probably easy to you, but listening to it seems like it's a very complicated process. What if a person was interested in getting into doing designing their own, creating their own neon tubes? What would you suggest? Is there specific classes that they should take? Is there certain things that they need to know about? That they need to have certain tools?
Well, there's not a lot of places to take classes. I have taught at the Smithsonian Resident Associate Program for 24 years, and we had a workshop that would be once a week for 7 weeks, I think it was.
Hmm.
And I taught them the basics of bending, and then we filled their tubes, and they all walked out with the lit neon tube and usually some other media that they combined them with, like acrylic or wood or some natural material. But there are better, more extensive classes, excuse me, in New York City at
Hmm.
Urban Glass, and I think there's maybe even another place there up in New York City, and a few places around the country that teach neon production. And it just kind of depends if you want to, become a neon tube bender, like for signage, that's kind of one route. But if
Hmm.
you're using it to generate light in sculpture, usually it's just too much work, to learn. It took me like 6 years, to do mine. But I was like determined to make sculpture and neon at the same time because I
Hmm.
felt like I could integrate them much better. I mean, most artists just take a drawing to a shop and get a tube back
Yeah.
and then work with whatever material they're working with, whatever it is, and do it that way. And so at certain points in the history of fine art and neon, people would turn against artists that didn't make their own glass,
Yeah.
bend their own glass. But the thing of it is, you can not bend your own glass and buy tubes and make great art,
Yeah.
and you can bend your own tubes and make terrible art. So it's not that so clear cut, whether you bend it or not. The main point is to make some decent art.
So the benefit of knowing how to bend yourself potentially is to be able to use the neon tubes to outline your artwork in the way that you want it to, the way that you want to outline it. If that,
Yeah, if you want to outline or backlight or whatever you want to do, you
yeah,
can work with, because I've worked with the figure and drawn around the figure and backlit the figure when I was younger.
yeah,
I don't really do that. Well, there's this piece right here behind me there. Uh,
yes, yeah,
where is it? There it is. That's backlit. So I can't. I'm going in reverse here. Anyway, so yeah, there it is, backlit. It's a beautiful ultra blue, and it's a cast of a figure in a prayer pose. And it's in a bonded copper. I used to do a lot of bonded copper pieces, and it's patinaed over the years. It's just a beautiful, beautiful piece. And then I would draw around fragmented figures, early in my career, and I loved it. I did a lot of work that way, and but then I outgrew it, and I haven't done
yeah,
that for 20 years, since then. So I
yeah.
found that I learned how to draw on buildings and do monumental outdoor sculptures, in about 2003 or four, in that time period, and I made a lot of outdoor sculptures, and that was very exciting to be
Hmm.
able to take a drawing in light and learn how to make I use rolled aluminum to hold all the electronics and the high voltage wire, and
Yeah,
learn how to attach it to the structure of the building. So
yeah.
I've used neon in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I don't have photos of that, but I know one of your pieces is in Silver Spring. It's that little
Right.
things like it's like light tubes sticking out, and then you have one that's wrapped around an elevator, which I thought was really
That's
cool.
that's the Silver Spring one.
So that's the Silver Spring one. So the other one, I can't remember what location was that. I remember it was like a sculpt. It was a statue, and it was like tubes sticking out.
Of a statue?
Yes, it was like
Oh,
a. It was like I think it was at trying to remember where I recall seeing it. Um, I know it was tall and it had like tubes kind of coming out, almost like a. If I had to explain what it looked like, it almost looked like water shooting out, kind of like a water fountain. But
uh, I don't know. You're not thinking of Vivace in front of the Watati Daniel Library, are you? 'Cause
it's
it's kind of like this.
possibly,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, those both of those structures are very, very interesting. But I mean, I just love how your artwork is versatile. Um, you can use it, as you said, to backlight sculptures. You can put it on buildings. I know one of the reasons, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you wanted to do work in DC is because it's bigger. It's a bigger wall space.
Yeah. Well, I got a lot more opportunity. I was in Minneapolis when I learned neon
Yeah,
a long, long time ago at the American School of Neon.
yeah.
But I was only there for a few months after that, and then I moved to Minneapolis and first worked in a shop lighting up neon. She let me work in the corner of her shop, and
Hmm.
then I helped her with installations. And I do that for artists here in my studio too.
Yeah. Yep. I want to ask you about. I have some other pieces. Another one that I really, really liked when I was kind of looking up some of your work was the random neons.
Yeah.
And I guess the reason I picked some of these pieces is because at least this type, I love abstract work.
Hmm.
And I thought this was just amazing. Can you tell the audience just a little bit about this?
Yeah. This is when I was at the Kennedy Center here. Um, yeah, and this is in my studio. This is like a 10 foot by 8 foot piece of random pieces of neon. Anyway, I've been collecting, rejected tubes and donated tubes, and for 20, well, for 30 or so years. So I don't know, about 10 years ago, I used to just hang them on a rack. We had a wood frame and a chicken wire, and we just hang them on that thing. And before you know it, it was getting kind of dense with them.
Mhm.
And one day I was going to have a show opening at my studio there in the firehouse where I lived. And I decided to light some of them. And so I lit about a third of them, which was probably about 40 tubes. And when it came on, I went, oh my God, this is a piece of art. I mean, it was so spontaneous. You couldn't design that much spontaneity. There's no way. And the
Mhm.
multicolored facetness to it was incredible. And so then when I moved over here from that firehouse, I brought those tubes and I made a steel rack frame and steel mesh. And I just started grabbing them from my storage racks and just randomly placing them. And I kind of got the idea from, learning at that time a lot about John Cage, how he would choose random notes,
Mhm.
one after another, and it would become a composition of things you
Mhm.
could never imagine. And I was really trying to use his technique, but people think I'm over there sweating over each tube and each bend, but actually I was randomly picking ones that were already done. And putting them into well, they become a composition, let's put it that way. And
Mhm.
yeah, they're very exciting pieces and lots of colors and energy. And I'm not, I'm ready to do them anytime. I've gotten commissions that have like that. I got a DC exclamation point commission from the Arts and Humanities here in DC, and I made an outdoor sculpture 11 feet tall and about 22 feet wide of the DC exclamation, all in random tubes.
Yeah. Yeah, and that the one that was was it in front of a like a window? It was either at your studio or the Hoffner Gallery. Was that it was the one that said DC, right?
Yeah, it says DC exclamation point.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
the first place it showed was at a music festival in Southwest.
Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it was
Awesome. Yeah,
fun. Yeah,
that was really good. Another piece that I really enjoyed, or I didn't even know this was your work, and I would drive past it every day. And I said, oh, that's interesting. It was the emergency or the missing persons
yeah.
flyer. And I'm going to show the audience this. Tell me, how did you come up with this idea? What inspired you to do this?
Well, it was just listening to a news report one day, probably on NPR, about how people were going, children a lot and young adults, some adults too, were going missing. In nearby reservations in the Southwest. They were American Indians, and then they would notify the authorities, and they would do nothing. I
Mm,
mean, absolutely nothing. And they would just sit there with these missing people with no help whatsoever. And having a family myself, it just really pulled at my heartstrings. And I thought, well, what could I do? What could I do? I try to give back. And so then I thought about my own medium, because neon is at first an attention grabber, that
mhm,
one. But second is it's a call to action. It does get people motivated because of the energy that it has. And so I decided to take that missing part of the flyer that the police department supplied me with the flyers
Mhm.
and turn that into red, kind of emergency red color.
Mhm.
And it was a huge hit with the families. And when they'd have awareness rallies like here for Risha Rudd, they would ask me to bring it out there and put it on an easel. And, they got more press that way.
Mhm.
The press would focus on it and talk about it more. And then, this was on a busy street corner where they had the rally. And so, people in the cars going by were made aware of the issue as well.
Yeah. No, that was pure genius. I like I said, I would always see it, and I would drive past, and I would be in my car, and I would see it. I said, "Ah, that's interesting." And I didn't take a closer look. So honestly, I just said, "Well, maybe someone just came up with the design." But when I was putting stuff together for the interview, and I read about the project, I was like, "Oh wow!" I said that was a great way to really get attention. And like you said, neon, it's an eye catcher. Anything with lights and it's bright and it's vivid, it draws your attention to it, and it makes you want to actually look at it. And so I'm definitely happy to hear that this project was actually able to be helpful to the family and get them the necessary press that they need.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing that I know that you've worked on, it's called the Ground Zero series, and I want you to tell the audience about that. Which was This is another way that you use neon to draw attention, but also accent features. In a building on the wall. I was looking. I'm show the audience different photos, but
Mm.
I thought this was really really cool.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about this project?
Well, what started to happen with my curiosity and my interest was that I was starting to want to study the human urge to mark. Now,
Hmm.
I hadn't gone to the 27 ancient cave sites in 3 continents yet, but I was on the lookout for energetic drawing,
Hmm.
drawing uh, without inhibitions. And I saw this photograph by a New York photographer that was hired by the High Museum in Atlanta to capture the South in some way. And they asked several other artists to do the same. But anyway, she took a photograph of the interior of the Ground Zero Blues Club, which is in Clarksville, Mississippi, and showed the table, showed the graffiti everywhere. I mean, when you go into that club, it's pretty astonishing. I mean, like here you see an interior window, and every square inch is graffitied. You have chairs that are graffitied up and down the legs, on the backs, the sides. Here you see the graffiti on the top of a seat, a bar stool, and the part I outlined there is where it had ripped open, and you can see the sponge in there. I just thought it was kind of interesting.
Hmm.
Roy was a drawing that was above the men's urinal, and the thing in the center there with looks like flaps. The men while they were using the urinal, they would pick at the drywall until they actually picked a hole right through it. It's kind of just crazy neurotic thing, about men, or maybe about everybody. I don't know. But all these things became very interesting to me, and I got them back. I had them. The ones I liked. 18 of them. I had them printed, beautiful prints from matte enhanced Epson prints. By Dodge Chrome, does a really good job. And then I cut them back, and I put my own last light mark on them. And sometimes I just lit them from within, and blocked off the light with plywood behind the photograph. But a lot of times I did drawings on the front, but I always used this technique where I took my blockout paint, which is what we use to block out parts of tubing that we don't want to glow,
Hmm.
but I would put on a first coat very quick. And I did that once. I put on a first coat very quick. And of course, first coats don't cover, so it didn't quite cover, maybe 2/3 covered. And then I turned it on to see how I'd done. And it was like, oh my God, it's finished. It looks scratchy. It looks like the background that it's on. I mean, I don't want to paint this thing completely out. It looks alive, but, still blends in with the background. And so that's how I came up with the technique of creating the lines in the Ground Zero series.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Um, so you ended up starting a career where you were doing these different projects for neon. neon work sculptures, whether it was outlining something, creating something for an organization or to put on the wall. When did you decide to say, you know what, I want to teach this skill? When did you decide to actually become an instructor?
Well, that was like in the very early 90s or maybe 89. And I'd gotten married, and we had my son Travis, and we just really couldn't make ends meet. And so I really wasn't a choice really to teach, but I needed to. I
Mhm,
really needed to have some side income, and I started designing commercial neon for people to get
mhm,
that side income. But I was very fortunate because it was the Smithsonian, a great institution for art and
mhm,
other many things around the world, and they hired me to teach a neon light sculpture course. It was a seven session course. Met once a week for 7 sessions, and I met so many great people. I mean, they have such a
mhm,
long reach there of advertising, and people became my friends out of that, and they became customers, and some of them were gallerists and helped promote my work. And so it was a great gig to have. I closed it down when the pandemic hit, because you do all this bending with the hose in your mouth, and you're all in the
mhm.
same area right next to one another, and you can't wear masks. So I closed it down for now. I mean, I haven't really figured out how to open it back up, but I might. I'm thinking about it. I think I'm going to do like a weekend workshop and try it out.
Mhm. Well, please do, because I'm waiting.
Okay.
I would love to learn this technique, and to see what it's about. I think it's an amazing skill, and one of the things that I enjoy about learning about what you do is that there are potentially other career options for people that they had no idea existed. I would have never known there was a such thing as a neon sculptor. Like, I mean, I see
Mhm.
the signage,
Yeah.
and you quite naturally say, oh, someone had to put this together, but you're
Yeah.
not thinking about that when you see it, and so you don't look at it as a potential career option. And then on top of that, just the way that you've been able to utilize your work, I mean, your medium of neon is amazing. Like the missing signs, I love it. The different things that you're doing with buildings. There was another project that I came across, and I wish I had an actual video of it, but it was called, I think it was The Running Man.
Yeah.
And you utilize neon, but it was also some animation elements in there, which I was
Yeah.
like, I said, this is pure genius, and this is on a building. And so, like, there are people that you can actually create careers with something as exciting as neon. And I love all your work. I'm speechless. uh,
Thank you. Yeah.
um, I have another piece I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit. And it's actually, you did this with Louise, another local artist
Yeah.
of Anacostia. Can you tell the audience a little bit about this piece on Donald Trump?
Well, I have been an enemy of Donald Trump, and I've despised him for some time. And as he became more and more vile, I thought, well, what can I do again? It was one of those things. What can I do? And I thought, well, maybe I want to do like a neon drawing, over a painting. And I had met Louise, and he's a great portrait painter, and I approached him with the idea, and he says, "Yeah, I'd work with you." And so Luis did. We talked about everything. I talked about his painting, and he talked about my neon. It wasn't like we just did it all separate. We really collaborated, which was a nice thing to be able to do with another artist.
Mhm.
And he did a great painting of Trump, with that kind of defiant, arrogant, angry look on his face. I decided that he should be on fire, so I lit him at the ankles there, going up. And then we both picked out different phrases that were, pertinent to Trump and his whole atmosphere of vileness. Fake news blinks on and off here. Of course, Black Lives Matter became a counter issue to Donald Trump. And the piece really got a lot of attention. I have a contact that has in New York City that I've shown in, and has one of my negative body casts that you talk about. It's a falling man. It's at the Cell in Chelsea, and they have a big storefront window there. And I asked them if they would show the Trump piece in there, and they said, yeah. And I took it up there and showed it there for a few months before Christmas a few years ago. So yeah, it's gotten around, the Trump piece, and I'm very proud of it. And he's still around, so it's still a lively topic, Trump.
So, have you seen that your work, like, I mean, you talk about the missing persons flyer, the Donald
Uh,
Trump piece. There's another piece I believe that you did. It says "Stop Putin."
yeah.
So, has your work now been more geared towards social issues or politics? Do you see that happening more with your work now?
Well, it's almost exclusively there. Not quite, but it's kind of shifted. I've made a lot of art, thousands of pieces of art. A lot of them are out in the public and private collections, and you know, um, I needed something more than making a piece of art that went into someone's home, or even a public art piece. And I just started to think of things that I could do for others, and
Hmm.
issues that I felt were important for humanity. And maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, I started to have that as my focus,
Hmm.
and it's still my focus, really. Is working on social issues, political issues when the time comes, it's right, and it's a great place to be, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Um, Something recently happened to in Anacostia. Um, and you and I both know what happened. Anacostia became an arts and culture
Yeah.
district. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's good. I mean, there's a lot of artists here, maybe not so well known as other parts of the city, but um, I think it's great, because we have a lot of underserved artists here in this area, and this is going to give them commissions. I mean, they're getting a lot of commissions for murals. It's a big
Mhm,
mural project going on,
mhm.
and so I mean, it's great for Anacostia and Ward 7 and 8 to have this initiative, and they gave a bunch of money for it for the Anacostia Bid Business Association that helps small business get going. So yeah, it's a great thing.
Speaking of some of the mural projects, are you going to take part in a big mural project? Are we going to see some Craig Craft work on one of these walls?
Well, I would love it. The head of the bid group, she's been trying to get the money together to have me do a commission in Anacostia. So I'm looking forward to that. Really, I'd love to make a piece for the community.
Yeah, I would love to see it. That's like the only mural I'm looking forward to see. I want to see a whole mural of neon tubes.
Well, I do too. We can work together on that, maybe.
That would be amazing. So I know that you said that you are working on re bringing up your workshop. What happens in your workshop? Can you tell the audience some of the things that they'll learn or they'll get to do in your workshop?
Well, first I go over the history of neon in art. Starting, I guess the first sculpture really in neon was in the 1950s
Mhm,
by Luis Fontana. It was like a free-form sculpture that hung from the ceiling, and it took off from there. Not fast or anything, but I go through all the big name artists that use light, and especially neon. I include like Dan Flavin, who uses fluorescent tubes because it could have been
mhm,
neon. Mostly, it's kind of a history of light by artists to start with, and then we go into like the basics of how to make a neon tube and
mhm,
what's required in terms of the power requirements and the different components besides the neon tubing to set up a system of neon. And then pretty much from there, we go into the basic bends I've talked about with you a little bit of the glass. And they use clear glass, 10 millimeter, and they practice these basic bends to get a feel for what it's like to have molten glass and try to control it in a bend. And
Mhm.
believe me, it's super difficult. So usually they come in with some very complicated drawings, and they end up simplifying them quite a bit. But I think it's good that they do get something done. So it's okay that they simplify them. Some
Yeah.
people stick with it though, and they just, they take it. Some people have taken two, three, I think somebody's taken 4 workshops to try to get one done.
Wow.
Yeah.
4 workshops to try to get one done.
Yeah. Not one tube, perhaps it would be 4 tubes, but very intricately arranged.
Yeah.
Some
Wow.
complicated bending.
Wow.
But you can do it in one.
I have some photos, that I kinda found online. So
Hmm.
this is your space,
Yeah.
and it kinda shows some of the things that you work what it so this is the tube, right?
This is actually a meter to measure the gas pressure in the
Okay.
tube. Yeah,
Okay.
this is called the manifold, and
Mhm.
right behind it, the right side of that white piece of wood there, is the flasks of inert gas. The neon, the argon, krypton, and then all these valves are after you attach the tube to the manifold on the left side, and right below my arm, you attach the tube, and then you have to go through a series of steps to get the tube hot enough, really up to almost melting temperature, and then you have a vacuum pump hooked up to it, and you suck out any impurities that you can. I mean, that the more pure the tube is, the longer it lasts. So I try to use the best gauges I can and the
Mhm.
best techniques. So I don't want these tubes, to go dead too soon. I mean, they can last for 15 years. There's been some tubes that last, 30 years. So
Mhm.
you want to try to shoot for the long-lived tube. But anyway, it's all science. It's a bunch of physical science, actually. And because I had a degree in science and took a lot of science,
Yeah.
chemistry, I took, and physics I had to take, and that. So that I wasn't scared of the science part of it. And that helped a lot because it can be kind of intimidating.
Yeah. So I know that you started off in science, and so you found a career that you were able to really combine both your interests. The heavy science background, but then also you kind of also had some uh engineering there, some industrial stuff, and then now you found this medium of neon, and you were literally able to just create something new. Would you be considered one of or are there other artists such as yourself who do all of that, or is what you do unique with kind of combining the medium of neon with the structures that you create for buildings, the sculptures, animation? Is this something that you uniquely do?
Well, the critics seem to think so, that I've kicked neon off of Times Square more than any other practitioner. So I'm using it in ways that are not commercial. I mean, some of them are kind of commercial-ish, if
Hmm.
that's a word.
Hmm.
But yeah, I seem to go from one subject to the next and then use neon again in a different way.
Hmm.
So that I am very well known for, even around the world.
I have this is an off question, but I just wanted to ask it. Do you create your own Christmas lights?
When I first started, I did, yeah.
Oh,
I made,
really?
yeah, I made stars. I mean, I made a neon star and put it on the top of the tree. It's cute. It was pretty good looking. But I don't know. I stopped after a while. There's some great Christmas ornaments out there, I guess. I don't know. It's
Oh,
just
man, that's
a mini phase. I think 2 years I did it for Christmas.
that's amazing. Um, my next question is, are there any upcoming projects that we should know about? You got anything in the hopper that you're working on? I know for you, you were told you always have to challenge yourself. Do
Yeah.
better, think outside of the box. You got anything that's coming up?
Well, I have been flattered by the museum director at the State Department here in DC, and she invited me over there to look at their site, the main meeting room at the State Department.
Mhm.
And it's a huge room. It's like 30 by 40, or no, maybe 40 by 60. It's a gigantic room and 20 to 30-foot ceilings. And she had looked, for a light sculptor around the world and found a couple. But she really wanted me to propose something for that space.
Mhm.
And I've done some this would be free hanging. I'd hang all the tubes, from up above. Transformers would be up in the ceiling somewhere. And I have done those type of pieces, but not extensively.
Mhm.
And so, and then she had to get it approved by the administration there at the State Department. And the State Department administration decided that they couldn't invest, it was going to be very expensive, and they couldn't invest that kind of money in a permanent piece.
Mhm.
I don't know, they weren't comfortable with the permanent piece. So that was very disappointing. That was my first world class opportunity to create giant neon sculpture. But what I decided to, this is what I've done my whole career. I've always done this, that the random neon pieces, I did that too.
Mhm.
Um, I decided that I would go ahead and make not that big, of course, but I would make this piece, but in a smaller scale, maybe 15 by 10 or something like that. So I've had these acrylic ribbons bent um, in a translucent white acrylic, and they're like ribbons twisting and flowing through space. And I had 3 of those made at Precision Plastics here in Maryland. And then I'm going to do kind of like my random or unintentional drawing around them with
Mhm.
some swooping lines, but some of them really kind of dense, getting into a dense feel of neon. And then I'm planning to do it all in white. So we'll have the white acrylic and the white neon there. So I'll be working on that for some time.
Nice, nice. Now that would have been a nice sight to see at the State Department.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So is doing neon artwork, is it rather expensive? I mean, I know what muralists they'll charge for it, but because of all that goes into creating the tubes, is that what makes it really expensive to really do bigger pieces?
Well, the expense is to set up the shop.
Uh-huh.
If you want to make your own neon tubing, you can do it for less than 10,000, but you really won't have the quality equipment and supplies that you're going to need. So it's probably going to take as you work, it's probably going to take $20,000
Mhm.
to set up to make your own neon. Now you can of course make patterns, paper patterns or models in 3D and take them to a shop and get it done. So
Mhm.
then it's not so expensive. But yeah, everything is expensive. All the supplies are expensive. It's special glass. It's special tools. Every tool is special,
Mhm.
and everything costs a lot of money, you know. And so it can be discouraging, to keep the shop going. And you
Mhm.
really have to be selling a lot of work, really, to tell you
Yeah.
the truth. But I've gotten a lot of, not a lot, yeah, I guess a lot of big scale commissions that have really helped finance my studio.
Mhm.
And but I do need to get those every once in a while, or I can't make it.
Mm. Well, I mean, s- I see how you're very versatile with your work, and I know that that's been the saving grace of being able to come up with different things as you are waiting for those bigger projects to come.
Yeah.
In which that just comes with just being an entrepreneur in general. You just have to kind of come up with various creative projects. What are some other projects that you've worked on that maybe we haven't gone over that were maybe projects that you had no idea would turn into something big, and it was just maybe something that you just decided to work on, but then it ended up being a huge seller for you?
Well, what first comes to mind is a commission I did for the Tucker Road Ice Rink in
Mhm.
Maryland, and the PG County public art person came to me and asked me to submit. So I submitted my work for consideration, and I got selected. And so I did a sculpture. I went out to the ice rink and I skated as a kid, but not as an adult. But people love skating, and the teams involved all through grade school or beyond, and adult hockey is very popular.
Mhm.
So they built a beautiful rink out there, but they wanted a sculpture on the plaza. And so by going in there, I saw, and everybody knows this. When they skate, it wrecks the ice, not wrecks, but it shows the marks of the blades, and they're crisscrossing, and they stop, and they cut the ice rapidly in one direction, and I mean it's a great set of patterns. And
Mhm.
so I made a rendering from photographs of a pattern I liked on the skate rink, and then I had that made into a vinyl image, and I had that vinyl image of the skate paths, and a sculpture was like supposed to be a chunk of ice,
Mhm.
and it had irregular edging. It's about 10 feet tall, 8 feet wide, and 6 feet 8 feet wide, 6 feet tall, and that whole piece was then backed by an aluminum frame and a box, so I could put the neon inside there. So the neon became something that was behind the acrylic and
Mhm.
behind the vinyl, and I had it script, and I programmed it to go whoosh, like it might be happening in the rink. And so it's a pretty beautiful, unique piece. I mean, I don't know how I ever came up with it. I'll tell you, it's so strange, to have that thing made. It was a big project. I had to enlist a very famous transformer manufacturer, in California that makes electronic transformers, and
Mhm.
his name is Tom at Tech 22, and he helped me with the electronics for it. And then, see, neon. I probably shouldn't tell you this because it's not a great thing about neon, but in cold weather, neon dims. And
Mm.
so I couldn't have that neon dim because it was indirect light. And so
Yeah.
then a friend of mine suggested, well, we could talk. Why don't you talk to a heating person who puts in underfloor heating? So I thought, oh, that's a pretty good idea. So I called that person's contractor, and he was interested enough to do it. He designed the heating for inside that cabinet, and a thermostat in there, and then we could program it so that when it got cold, we could keep the cabinet. It's I don't know, 68 degrees, and so the neon stayed bright then. But that's a lot of overlapping different disciplines there. We got the
Yeah.
acrylic work, the metal work. We got the heating guy in there, and you got the neon and then all the programming. It's really a mixed media piece.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And, you know, I just, I'm thinking to myself, I could probably go on Amazon and buy myself a beginner's kit and do this, but it sounds more complicated than me just buying an Amazon
No,
kit online to do it. And like I said, I admire all that you've done and your work. And I look forward to seeing more of your projects.
thank
And
you.
hopefully the State Department will call you back and to have you do it, and hopefully one day I'll be riding through Anacostia and I'll see your big neon mural. I'm just putting this out there. So if anybody from the Anacostia bid is watching this, please get some money so that he can make
Yeah,
this big neon mural.
yeah, thank you. Thanks for the support. I appreciate it.
Always. We do have a question. It is from S. Alexandra Russell. She said, in your research on cave art, did you observe any universal themes, especially any that are relevant to our time?
Universal themes. When I looked at the cave art, I became very interested in the symbols that were found in the caves, and symbols such as spirals, arrows, ovals, and rectangles. Some were geometric, and some were drawings. But those symbols are very deeply entrenched, I think, mostly in our subconscious. And I became interested in juxtaposing those cave symbols, like of the arrow with the contemporary arrow, into one piece of art. But I'm not sure I can say directly, but those are very deeply felt and created symbols, and they really are universal for all times. And they're simple. A circle,
Mhm.
simple. And the etchings that you find in these caves, a lot of them are animals, but about 20% are symbols,
Mhm.
and they do resonate. I mean, like I was telling you, the shaman, they go into a deep, deep trance, dehydration, to come up with the images that they come up with. And yes, I would say that they're universal symbols.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So we have 1 minute left, and I have a fun question to ask you. This is actually a question that ask everybody when I meet them. And I'm always excited to hear the responses because they're always going to vary based off of the person. But the question is, if you were a food item, what would you be and why?
Um, A food item. Huh? I don't know. I'll just tell you what the first thing that comes to mind, and that is sushi.
Sushi. Why?
Well, sushi's, it's very interesting flavors, and you can make it hot with wasabi, and you put in your sauce in it there, and it really spices it up too. But there's such a wide variety of tastes and textures and visuals and that go into sushi, and plus that it just tastes so good, So that's what would come to my mind.
Nice. So your personality is that, or is that of sushi? There's a variety of things going on with you, but it's also very versatile.
Yeah, I guess you got it.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much, Mr. Kraft,
You're
for
welcome.
joining Creatives Talk. And I can't wait for your workshop to come out.
Okay.
Hopefully I'll see some within the next few months. If not, that's cool. I'm around.
Okay.
Can you let the audience know how they can get in touch with you if they want to come past your studio?
Mhm. Well, my webpage is craigcraftstudio.com. And you could, yeah, here you are right here. You could visit my website, and that would lead you, I think, anywhere you want to go with the workshops. You can sign up there to be put on the waiting list. And then it shows all my projects. Most all the projects are on there. So that's a good way to get introduced to it. And then I'm in Anacostia. I'm right on one of the main two roads in Anacostia, at least here near the river. And I'm on Good Hope Road. I'm actually almost right next to the Anacostia Art Center, which is a bigger building.
Mhm.
So that's a landmark that you'll see as soon as you turn down Good Hope Road. And I have all that neon in the front window, so especially at night, you can't miss me.
You can't. And please, I would encourage anyone, go on the website. And if you do have an opportunity one day to come by, if Craig is there, he will give you an awesome tour of his space. It is amazing. Like, uh, some of the pictures that I showed, doesn't do it justice just to actually going to his space. His space is awesome. So please go and visit him. Also, you can follow him on Instagram, at Craig Craft Studios. He posts some of his amazing work and different things that he's working on. Again, thank you so much, Craig. I appreciate you coming out, and I appreciate the online audience who joined us for another episode of Creatives Talk. You can follow us at Project Create DC. This is our Instagram and also our Facebook page, or you can visit our website at projectcreatedc.org. And if you want to stay connected with me, you can follow me on Instagram at the Shanae Banks. Have a great evening, everyone. And again, thank you so much for joining us.